Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library, and I am thrilled to be here with Heather Wolf, who we're going to be talking about her book, Find More Birds. It's fantastic photography, ideas on how to find birds wherever you are, and we will be talking about that plenty in the next hour or hour and 15 minutes. But before we get to that, I wanted to say a couple of things. One is that I'd like to thank the Friends of the Ashland Public Library who support all of our programming. We could not do all the fun stuff we do without them. I'd also like to thank Heather for letting us share this program with a lot of local libraries. And people were so excited about this program. I think we have 35 libraries partnering with us on this program. And instead of listing them out right now, I will put them in the chat so you know who has big birders in their communities. But I would like to welcome all the patrons from all those libraries, as well as from Ashland and from wherever you heard about us. You can buy Heather's books signed by bookplate from Aesop's Fables, because independent bookstores are the best. So I will put a link for that in the chat as well, because some people do like to have signed books. I certainly do. I have a whole shelf of them. So Heather has just for a little bit of what we're going to be doing, Heather has a presentation. She's going to be talking for about 45-50 minutes. And then we're going to take questions from the audience in a Q&A. So like you can put the questions in the Q&A, which is a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, but feel free to use the chat to chat with each other, exclaim about pictures, whatever you need to do in the chat. But if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A so I don't lose track of it. So this program will go until about 8:15 tonight, 8:15 Eastern time. Anyways, Heather, thank you for being here. Heather is an author, a photographer. Her book, Find More Birds, just came out recently. She also has a book called Birding at the Bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge, which she can sort of see out of her window, which is kind of cool. But Heather, thank you so much for doing this and being with us. And I can't wait to hear everything you have to say.
Thanks, Mina, and thanks everyone for being here. I'm so excited to share how to find more birds tonight. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I need to remember to turn on the sound. So I'm going to share sound. Let's see, where is that? Share computer sound is on, and I'm going to start this up. All right. So hopefully everyone can hear me. If not, Mina, you can just say you can't. I am starting with this slide, which really does not mention my book, does not mention my name or anything, but it is super exciting because this is the bird migration forecast for not tonight, but for tomorrow night. The first one at the bottom in the bottom left corner is for tonight, but the reason I have the tomorrow night highlighted is because, as you can see, it's yellow, it's hot. That means it's going to be heavy migration movement tomorrow night. So that means the day after, you want to get out there if you can and look for more birds. It's a great way to find more birds. I'm going to be mentioning this. This is a tip in the book, but throughout migration, which goes through November, you can visit birdcast.info, which is a project of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology where I work, and I do get to work on this project. It's one of my favorites. But I did just want to start out with that, just so you know that this is a great way to see. I use it to see if I can sleep in tomorrow or not. Maybe I can tomorrow, but definitely not in tomorrow night. The day after, I'm going to have to get up early. So Find More Birds is my second book, as Mina mentioned, and it came out about a month ago. And it's really like it is going to help you find more birds. And it's a lot more than that, though. So really, the book is about how to help you find birds, but also really how to witness amazing, crazy behaviors of even the most common birds. Because if you pay a little closer attention, you can see pigeons or house sparrows or some of the year-round birds that you have engaging in courtship, fighting, doing territorial defense, crows chasing hawks, all sorts of things, just by kind of tuning in to what's happening around you in nature. So the book is really kind of a way to tune in better with nature. and how to experience nature. So experiencing nature to the fullest. As you start noticing a lot of these things that are mentioned in the book, you will experience a whole other world, not just of birds, but of insects, of mammals, of plants, and the whole ecosystem of which birds are a part. Connecting with not only nature, but also with the community. So as you know, there's a lot of community around birding and bird watching, and sharing this with other people is a huge aspect of what can help you find birds, but also what can bring you joy in sharing the magic of birds. And this can also aid in conservation, which brings us to contributing. So through Find More Birds, you can contribute data to citizen science, like the eBird project. You can lead bird outings in your community. You don't have to be an expert. You can just share birds and go out with some friends and kind of build that awareness of birds and nature around you. So I love the title. It was my first choice title, believe it or not, and it made it through Find More Birds, and I love it. But there definitely is more to that. And I do want to just read a little bit from the book. This will only take about a minute, and it's the only thing I'm going to read from the text. I am going to read a blurb at the end. This is it's important to note that the positive effects of finding birds will reach far beyond connecting with nature and will touch many areas of your life. Focusing on a bird will draw you into the present moment like never before and make you more mindful. Seeing the many struggles birds face will generate gratitude for the many conveniences we humans enjoy. You'll find yourself striking up conversations and making new friends while birding, and instantly helping and learning from each other. Putting a smile on people's faces will become a habit. When they ask what you're looking at, you might show them a scarlet tanager or golden crowned kinglet and make their day. And you could very well inspire them to start looking and listening themselves. There are countless other things you'll notice. You might look forward to more walks in the rain or ferry rides in the winter. I used to hate cold weather, but now I find myself traipsing through snow, unfazed, to watch bald eagles floating on blocks of ice. Having to wait in a long line outside might become a welcome chore. You can look to the sky for soaring birds of prey or use the Merlin Bird ID app to tune into the area's bird sounds. While the show's ongoing script will be different for each of us, it will no doubt be life-changing. So tonight's topics, there are a lot of tips from the book, and we're going to be talking about just a few of the bird finding adventures I embarked upon during the making of this book. I have 3 of them. And then we're going to jump into the top tips for finding more birds from the book. And then also more tips, but more tech focused tips that you can use to find more birds. So let's go ahead and get started. So it was really fun to make this book. I did get to visit places I normally wouldn't, because my first book was focused around Brooklyn Bridge Park. All of the photos and stories were from Brooklyn Bridge Park here. But in this second book, I did travel to California, Arizona, and outside of the country in Colombia, Ecuador, and was able to incorporate some photos and stories from the book. And one of my, or in the book. And one of my favorites is the Burrowing Owl. So I had used eBird, which is a citizen science project I work on at Cornell Lab, to find where the burrowing owls were. And also had done some, Googling to see locations of these birds. And there was a place in Marathon in the Florida Keys, a golf course, where there had been some sightings of burrowing owls. So I went over there. I didn't see any. But there was a lady outside, and I said, "Oh, do you know anything about the burrowing owls?" She said, "They're not here anymore, but they're in a neighborhood, and I know someone who knows where they are. There's a real estate agent, and I'm going to give you directions to his office, and you can ask him." Who knew you could ask a real estate agent how to find more birds? So she gave us directions. Walked in and said, "Yeah, we're here for the owl." And the receptionist led us to the agent. He just grabbed his keys, drove, it said, "Follow me," and dropped us off in one of the empty lots in a neighborhood. And after a few hours, after staring at a hole where these owls burrow in, an owl appeared outside of the hole. And it was just amazing that that was a crazy way to find more birds. And this is a photo of a burrowing owl. As you can see, that mound is where it nests and raises its young. Another great experience I had during the making of the book was seeing something called swifts. Many of you probably are familiar with this. Many of them have left now, but in the spring and summer, they're here, and they do roost in chimneys. So chimney swifts are the ones we have in our area here in the Northeast. And I did want to include these in the book. The thing is, most of the chimney swifts that enter the chimneys here, there's maybe a dozen. I haven't seen like a lot of them entering the chimneys, but I had heard about places out west where thousands of birds enter chimneys. So I made a trip out to Portland, Oregon to visit a place called Chapman School, which is known for their Vox's swift roost. It's a different type of swift called Vox's swift. And this is a video of them getting ready to enter the chimney. And what was really cool was there were families, all sorts of people with picnics out watching this show at the school. And then what happens is as the sun goes down, these birds kind of concentrate in more of a cyclonic movement here, which you can see it's darker, but you see they're going into the chimney. So there were probably at least a few thousand, maybe 6,000 that night. I can't remember the exact number, but I did get a photo for the book, but the video is even more impressive, obviously. So that was another exciting experience. So you can really see them moving in right now, going into the chimney. And this species actually goes mostly down to Venezuela. The chimney swifts that are in our area, most of them winter in Peru, but they're making a big trip for their southern migration down to South America in both cases. Now, my final bird I'm going to mention for the adventures of the book, there's plenty more adventures, but I'm just talking about species, is the acorn woodpecker. Now, I had read about this bird. It's out west. And I heard that it stockpiles acorns and it like stores acorns in holes in trees in what's called a granary. They cache food for the winter. So once again, I used eBird, which you can see where these species are. I found a location in San Jose, California, went there and I saw some acorn woodpeckers, but I wanted to see one of their granaries, right? So I'm walking around getting these great photos like this of the woodpeckers. And then all of a sudden I hear some banging like this. Where is that coming from? It did sound like banging on a tree. So I noticed there was like a small building where the restrooms were, and it was coming from there. So I looked around and there was an acorn woodpecker tending to its granary under the awning of that small building. So I got what I wanted. And more, because this bird it seemed like it was kind of destroying the building. I don't know how much longer that's going to be standing. But what's interesting about these birds' granaries is that the acorns shrink. Okay. So when the acorns shrink, the birds have to move them to a smaller hole so there's a tighter fit. So they're constantly working. I don't know how they do it. I mean, they're basically always tending to the granaries. There was a recent story in February of this year coming out of California, and some acorn woodpeckers had drilled some holes in a chimney, and the people in this house noticed, I think there were termites or some bunch of insects in the house, and they come to find out that in the chimney there were over 700 pounds of acorns that the acorn woodpeckers had stored in there. So they obviously had to get those removed. So pretty exciting. This bird is featured in the book. All these birds are. And it's just what I love about birding is there's always a new bird to see. So there's always either a new bird or an interesting behavior with common birds. Every time I go out, I see something that I've never seen before. So it's really cool.
Heather?
So yes.
I know I said I wasn't going to interrupt you, but I do have one question. Are these all photographs that you took?
All these photographs I took, yes. And all of the photos in the book I took as well.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
Sure. And not all of the photos you're seeing are in the book. That one of the awning that is in the book, it's a smaller photo. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, I can't believe I got all these photos. I have a lot of bad photos that I deleted, but I took enough that I had some good ones that made it into the presentation and the book. So that's the thing with bird photography is it's not as easy as it looks. So if you do want to get into that, don't get frustrated. We do delete a lot of bad photos, and that's just how it is. So the number one tip, the book is called 111 Surprising Secrets to Find More Birds. Not all of them are that surprising, but follow sounds, which seems intuitive. You don't have to know what the sound of the bird is to follow it. So say you just hear something interesting that you think is a bird. It could be a frog, who knows? But whatever it is, it's some kind of animal. You're probably going to see something interesting. So definitely follow any sounds you hear. One of the favorites around these parts is the northern cardinal. Many of you may know the sound of this bird, or you'll recognize it when I play it. And that's a very vocal bird. It's always singing around here, and it has many different sounds. But when it comes to learning bird sounds, if you do want to learn sounds, I find the best way is to watch the bird sing, which can be challenging out in the field or in your parks because you can't always get a good look at a bird singing. So if you can't, you can always look online. You can look at MacaulayLibrary.org. You can look on YouTube and say northern cardinal singing, or whatever bird you want singing, and then just watch it. And that way you'll have the visual association to learn bird sounds. It's very challenging to learn bird sounds. You don't have to do it, but if you want to, I'm just mentioning that. This is a bird that you're definitely going to be hearing a lot of. You've probably already heard it, but if not, you definitely want to listen for this in the coming weeks and all through the winter. This is my favorite bird in the world because it sings during the winter. It's here in the winter. It is gone in the summer because it's breeding in the boreal forests of Canada. But I'm going to go ahead and play this song. Yeah, you can mention in the chat if you recognize it. So that's the sound of the white-throated sparrow. Beautiful. So yeah, you'll be hearing a lot of that, like I said, come winter especially. And another thing, I'm going to be mentioning leaf litter is a great place to find birds, and especially white-throated sparrows. If you're in an area with leaf litter, they often forage in that kind of habitat. So it's if you hear that song, rather than looking up, look down to the ground, and that's a better place to find them. So other sounds like woodpeckers. So that was an interesting one because I was in my neighborhood here in Brooklyn, on a main street with a bunch of stores, and I heard that sound and I followed it. I just, it was about 2 blocks away, but followed it, found the tree where it was emanating from, but I could not find the bird. It was so loud, and I was looking up, and kind of similar to what I just mentioned with the white-throated sparrow, it was lower than expected. It turned out to be eye level. They're pecking away, and it was just an amazing experience. So it's really fun. Any sound you hear of a bird, follow it, even if it's you do recognize it and it's a common bird. That's exciting too, because I'm going to show you right here. This is the sound of a lot of European starlings, which often around sunset, they'll gather together, and it sounds like there's thousands of them, and you can't even see them, right? They're somewhere in the trees. But when I did find these starlings and I looked in the trees under there, I encountered a different surprise, which often happens when you're just looking at your average everyday birds. And there was a black and white warbler that was creeping up the tree that the starlings were in. And that happens all the time. You'll encounter that as you investigate sounds. You will find really cool things. This is an interesting sound, and I just got accustomed to this recently because I see a lot of American kestrels around here in Brooklyn. This is the smallest falcon in North America. And I actually heard this sound when I was walking into my apartment the other day, and I looked, and there was one perched right on a light post, 2 of them actually. But it's an interesting sound. I'm going to play it for you. It kind of sounds like a cross between like a laugh or a squeaky dog toy or something. But yeah, the more you watch these birds, if you see one vocalizing like that, just watch it and listen, and then next time you hear that, you'll go, oh, that's a kestrel. I don't have a sound for the barn swallows, but I'm just pointing out that we're kind of ending breeding season now. It was mostly spring and summer, but during summer, you'll hear a lot of begging cries of young birds, very high pitched, almost like the cedar waxwings, to sound like cedar waxwings make, which is similar to that of young birds, very high pitched, like. But that's a great way to find young baby birds and fledglings that are waiting to be fed. And then if you stick around, you can see them being fed. A lot of times, if the parent's not coming around to feed them, it may be because possibly you're too close. So it's good to back up a little bit, especially near a nest, and watch from like a hidden location so that it doesn't disrupt. Because this happens all the time. I see robins and they won't feed their young if I'm right by the nest. Back up 20 feet and then there you go. So that's definitely good to keep distance from the nests. And most of the barn swallows here in New York City, at least in my patch, have moved on. They tend to gather like in summer, late summer, and I call this the South America trip planning meeting, because one day there's a bunch of them like this gathered right by the sports courts over here in Brooklyn Bridge Park. And the next day they're gone and they're headed to South America. So you'll notice these different behaviors, how birds are, more gathering in groups before they're getting ready to migrate, because a lot of them do migrate in groups. The number 2 tip, top tip, is to just look for movement. Squirrels move too, leaves fall. We have a lot of movement happening around us. So it is challenging, but the birds, a lot of times it's like a gentle tug, or leaf litter. Like I mentioned, leaf litter, you could just look for something bobbing through. There's a warbler called an ovenbird I'm going to show you in a minute that does that. This is a brown creeper that it's in the book, and in the book it's much more camouflaged against a darker bark. But it's worth scanning tree trunks this time of year. It's fall, it's migration, then you could see this type of thing.
It's the time of the season when love runs high.
And the thing about these birds, the movement is such a great clue, because they're moving constantly because they're eating so much to fuel their migration. They a lot of them need to double their weight to make these migration flights. So the way they forage involves moving around most of the time, especially these tiny birds. So just kind of scanning the landscape, scanning the tree trunks, the ground, the sky, the trees, there's a lot to scan. So if you could systematically do it, sometimes in blocks, like I go horizontally and patch through, or just pick a tree to look at. And it may look like there's nothing going on in that tree, but if you wait 10 minutes, which is a tip in the book, stay a while, and you'll start to notice things happening, or some birds could fly in. So here's an example of what the movement's going to look like. This is for a low forager. This is a common yellowthroat. But if you're in a real like kind of scrappy field with a lot of plants, how do you find a tiny, 4-inch warbler? So this is what it's going to look like. So that I mentioned, another tip in the book is don't lose hope if it flies away. So you look for the movement, you finally get a fleeting look at the bird, and then it flies. But so many times I lead bird walks, and then when it flies, people say, oh, it flew away. But especially if you're in a park, like in an urban environment, the bird was probably going to stick around, or even in any environment, unless you saw it fly way far away, it's probably in an adjacent tree or in the surrounding habitat. So one thing you want to do is when it flies, lock onto it, and then follow it to where it goes. You could practice this. There's a tip for this in the book about how to do that. And the great thing is you go where it lands, and you can possibly get a better look and more quality time with the bird. The common yellow throat we saw in the previous slide was a female, and this is the male with the mask. Once again, this picture appeared in my first book, Birding at the Bridge, and I love it because this is how you're going to see the birds. A lot of times you're not going to see the full body, and a lot of the pictures I post on the blog, they're going to be hidden. It's difficult to find them. So you want to look for these little clues and subtle movements in the vegetation and other places. Also, if you're with a friend and you see a bird, this happens all the time. It can be really frustrating to share the location of the bird. You're seeing it, your friend's not. What do? So you can use clock face identification. So say a tree or even a lawn, say that's a clock, and you would say, oh, I see something at 3 o'clock. So if you look at 3 o'clock in this tree, there's something yellow. It looks pretty hidden, but you and your friend can lock onto that. You can use binoculars if you have them to kind of get on that movement, and then watch as the bird moves around, and hopefully it will move out into, this great view of the bird, and it will be all worthwhile. Other times in the sky, scanning the sky is a great way, look for movement. This is a red-tailed hawk coming in for a landing in the Brooklyn Heights neighborhood here. Soaring hawks, you can find them a lot, like in the afternoon. It's better when the heat is rising off the Earth's surface. And don't forget that, I tend to forget that when I'm out a lot, I forget to look up, So one thing, a tip in the book too, is to focus your binoculars on a plane. Not only is that going to help you focus, get your binoculars set up, which there's a way to do that, but that is in the book, but you can also, that's going to extend your focus to where the plane is, so that if there is a soaring raptor or a vulture or anything by where the plane is, you will see it. Whereas if you were looking with the naked eye, you may have missed that. I know that sounds far-fetched, but it's happened enough times that I put it in the book, and many people have said that they found birds that way. So definitely cool to check. Definitely look up. My number 3 tip is to check fresh water sources. Birds, not all birds, but a lot of birds, most birds need to drink water and bathe in water. And freshwater sources doesn't necessarily mean a giant lake or pond. It could just mean a tiny puddle or a small depression in a log like this where water has collected. And once again, my favorite bird, the white-throated sparrow, is hanging out. You're not going to believe that this is water, but this bird is drinking water from little droplets that are on the ground. It's not eating. And that's a gray catbird, which is a mimic. It's in the same family as a mockingbird. And that bird will be migrating south. It'll be going to Southeast and the Caribbean. Some of them do stay in the winter. We always have several stay here during the winter, but it's better if they migrate on. Here's another example. This bird everybody wants to see. It's a cedar waxwing. They're nomadic, and the best time to see them is on their breeding grounds. They do breed here in my local patch in Brooklyn Bridge Park. They like to breed in sumac trees, but outside of the breeding season, they're kind of hard to see, and especially to see them taking a bath is tough. But you see this water; it's not even an inch deep, right? This is in a water playground, and just the slightest little puddle is going to be a great source of a bath and a drink for these birds. Now, there's a little bit of a sad aspect to it. I mentioned the gray catbirds sometimes stay during the winter. And as you can imagine, when water freezes up, the freshwater sources and the birds that still need to drink, what do? So one of my favorite photos in the book that I don't have in this presentation, but it is of American robins waiting for ice to melt from a bench for their drinks. And this is a similar situation here with a gray catbird, which is getting its water from the droplets of a banister after a snow. Rain puddles, as I mentioned, water playgrounds are great, but also after a storm. It rained this morning, and it's always a great idea to head out after a storm, which is tip number 104 in the book. Not only does this mean there's more water sources and puddles to check, but some birds do get blown off course. So you get some rare birds showing up after storms, especially after major storms. Now, this is just a tiny little mud puddle in my local park. And it's this depression in the lawn has been here for like 2 years, believe it or not. And after a rain, it fills up with water. And I just check it all the time. I've seen ruby-crowned kinglets bathing in here. There's robins here, starlings, and you see them fighting over the bath and drinks. And it's just amazing that it's probably 2 feet long. And I've also seen cedar waxwings bathing in water that has collected in between clumps of grass on a lawn. So I just want to reiterate that freshwater sources can mean large or small, especially when it comes to bird bathing. They do need something very shallow, but large bodies of water, you could see birds that take drinks in flight. Like, for example, swifts or swallows will skim the surface of the water to take a drink, which is really magical. Now, I mentioned that storms often blow birds off course. And I have something in my book that what birds you've always wanted to see. It's a section, and it mentions a large pink bird. And what I talk about how there's a bird called a roseate spoonbill that is more common. It's actually in the Southeast and it's easy to find, but how flamingos are actually pretty difficult to find in even Florida. But guess what? With Hurricane Idalia, that has changed. This is the kind of flamingo I usually see in my neighborhood, and I do get excited. But with Hurricane Idalia, all these points are where flamingos have been seen in the last couple of weeks. This is unheard of. This is insane. And there's none in Massachusetts, none in New York, but you know, there could be some showing up. You never know, because you see there as far north as Pennsylvania. So storms are great, you know, getting out birding. Also, it's kind of like very calm afterwards. There's a stillness in the air. The birds are gonna come out and forage now that the rain has calmed down. So it's always a great thing to go birding after storm. So one of the other sections in the book is to visit birds' favorite restaurants, which are their habitats. Just like we have our favorite restaurants, you know, you could probably catch your best friend down at a certain restaurant every Wednesday night or something. It's the same thing with birds. Certain species and at certain times of year like certain restaurants. So one of the big ones, especially during fall, I call berry buffets. So a lot of plants are fruiting around this time. Some have already finished fruiting, but we still have more to go. For example, the hawthorns have yet to fruit, and at least here. And these are the cedar waxwings that are partaking in the hawthorn fruit. Also, this was a few weeks ago. This is elderberry, a gray catbird eating this. So really, anytime you see fruit, especially berries, small fruit, look for movement. Combine these tips into bird finding recipes. Here's some berries. Do I hear sounds? Look for movement. And you might, you know, because a lot of times in this section where you see this gray catbird, it'll be hidden and I'll just see movement on the inside and I'll just wait and then it'll pop out. I mentioned leaf litter several times. It's one of my favorite habitats because it's easy on the neck. So number 20 in the book is look at leaf litter. An ovenbird is a migrating warbler. It loves leaf litter. And what's great is this bird kind of struts like a chicken. It's constantly moving as it forages. So not only do you look for leaf litter, but it makes it easy to detect if this bird's around by just looking for movement. Many times when I lead bird walks, we will just stand in leaf litter. If it's the height of migration, we'll just stare at the leaf litter, and within 5 minutes, there's an ovenbird strutting by. So it's a really cool bird. Here's what it looks like when it's foraging. See, it's getting a lot of food, flipping over the leaves. A lot of people mistake this bird for a thrush because it has a lot of streaks on the breast, but it's tiny. It's a warbler. It's about 4 inches. Thrushes are more medium-sized, like robin-sized. So leaves are great. Another great restaurant habitat is mud. Mud stew. There's a lot of worms and mollusks and all sorts of things in mud and mud flats. Also in the spring, one of my favorite things to do is to watch barn swallows collect mud for their nests, because they build cup nests out of mud and dry grasses, and they construct them in buildings, under awnings, under piers. But then the other birds that forage, here's one in a mud flat. This is a killdeer.
Mud, mud, glorious mud. Nothing quite like it for cooling the blood. So follow me, follow down to...
Yeah, so there was some really tasty mud stew. It always makes me very happy when these birds are finding an abundance of food, because they really need it. A lot of them are migrating or collecting food for their young and things like that. As you would expect, seeds are another great source of food. So seed beds, the heads of flowers are great. This is the American goldfinches love to extract the seeds from the flower head. And this young one, it's a young one on the right that's kind of fluttering its wings, wanting to be fed. So yeah, goldfinches are big for seeds. They're also big feeder birds, because, you know, there's a lot of seeds at feeders. But if you have these big stands of like this is switchgrass, like prairie grasses or little blue stem, these are great sources of food for seed-eating birds, especially in the winter. So one winter here in Brooklyn Bridge Park, we got a visit from a very rare bird called a painted bunting, which you may know, it's like the tie-dye bird. It's red, green, blue, and yellow. But this was a juvenile male, which it showed up here in 2019. It stayed 2 months because there were so many seeds for it to eat. This is a picture of it where it's really showing off some of that green and where it's eating the seeds. And there were so many photographers snapping photos of this bird that it found another section of switchgrass and moved over there, and then everybody followed it over there. But seeds are a great resource. Now, that switchgrass and little blue stem, what I mentioned, those are native plants, but all sorts of native plants are great for attracting birds, as you know. A lot, they're full of insects. You know, I just went down to a flower field, which I have a picture of coming up here, but there's so many insects this time of year, and the birds need that protein. A lot of them are they're insectivores. That's all they eat. So they fuel their migration by just, filling themselves up, doubling their weight with insects. This is the black-polled warbler eating a caterpillar. And this is one of the birds that has one of the most impressive fall migrations. It takes a different route in fall than it does in spring. In the fall, these birds gather in the Northeast, and I'm going to show you. This is a map from Cornell Lab of Ornithology. This is generated from data contributed by all of us, you and me, if you use eBird. All of our data is used to make these models. Our data scientists create these models of migration. So I'm going to start the animation, and it starts like in winter, but we're going to get to this time of year. So say in winter, they're down in northern South America. They move up, you can see very far north. And then this time of year, you notice they're in the Northeast, and then they kind of, a lot of them disappear. So let me just play that again, because so you can see that again. When they gather in the Northeast, and then what happens. So it's coming up now. You notice they're not all going over land. Like a lot of that density disappears. And what's happening is they're flying down over the Atlantic to South America nonstop for 3 days. Some of them do make a pit stop in the Caribbean, but many of them go straight. So this is one of those birds that is doubling its weight. So it's also one of the birds in fall that the adult male looks a little bit different. So black-polled warbler is kind of like a black and white warbler, but with a fully black crown, but not in the fall. In the fall, they're going to look more like this photo you're seeing here. But when you do come across this bird, just imagine the journey it's about to take. down to South America nonstop. I mean, that's one of the reasons I love birds so much, is because of these migration journeys. I get excited anytime I see bugs, because buggy means birdie. You know, there's more food for the birds. This is a ruby-crowned kinglet, and it's just was perched here on the top of a tree, just jumping up to catch little gnats. This is the flower field I mentioned that I can almost see from here. And it's just a lot of native flowers. There's milkweed, there's Joe Pye weed, there's oxeye sunflower, surrounded by catalpa trees and sumac, and all sorts of black cherry as well. Many native plants, and as you can imagine, it's teeming with birds. There's a lot of movement going on. It's tough to detect. That video I showed you of the common yellowthroat was also taken in this flower field. But the great thing is it is low. So once the birds, you get a good view, it's going to be lower than eye level, which is great. This is one of my favorite native plants, the pink turtle head, also in that flower field. And this is a yellow warbler that is actually eating, I guess, the pollen or the flower itself, because I don't think it was getting insects in there from what I recall. I've also seen gray catbirds eating the pollen out of hibiscus flowers. So, and there's some aster in the background there. So yes, native plants, and even just bunches and bunches of all these plants growing together is so great for the birds. It also helps them hide from predators and take cover in the rain and all sorts of things. This is bayberry. And I show this because this is a yellow rump warbler. I mentioned a lot of warblers are insectivores, but the yellow rump warbler can actually digest these waxy bayberries or myrtle berries. And because of that, it can overwinter in our area. So definitely keep an eye out for these yellow rump warblers. They all have yellow rumps. One of the other sections in the book is how to see birds acting crazy. This was a section suggested by my publisher. I said, of course, I'll include it. I love this idea. And one of the top tips for this is to investigate the unusual. If you see birds flying like they normally don't, or like bowing or acting weird or dancing or vocalizing really aggressively, definitely investigate it. So I got this picture's in the book. It's one of my favorite, craziest pictures in the book. And I had seen some barn swallows pass by all the time where I would see them, but they were acting weird. They were flying like very unusually. And I took a closer look and I saw that they were kind of dive bombing this grackle. So I walked over to the sports courts where they were, and I noticed there was the grackle had this fledgling baby with it. And the reason the barn swallows were mobbing the adult was because grackles do steal eggs from nests, and the barn swallows were nesting right under the pier. So there was some serious drama going on. So one of the tips in the book is to take a seat. So I took a seat about 15 feet away from the grackles, and this bird started running towards me. It was crazy. And I got this photo. It's like a punk rock bird. So definitely one of my favorites. And I'm so excited that I investigated that commotion. Also, I saw something crazy just walking in a parking lot over here. And it was a cedar waxwing trying to get some string for its nest. These birds are notorious for using kite string in their nests. Also, anytime you hear the caw of crows, it can often mean there's drama going on. Crows love to harass red-tailed hawks. This is a photo from the book, but usually what you'll see is the crows chasing the red-tailed hawks, not this situation, which is surprising, but it's usually the crows that are causing the commotion. But definitely look for what's going on when you hear the caw of crows. Now, here's another interesting movement that I saw. Had never seen this and never saw it again yet, but it's two downy woodpeckers. I looked it up later when I got home, and apparently this is kind of establishing territory. So, I think I had seen one downy woodpecker acting strange, like fluttering like this, and definitely a thing awkward. Another section in the book is to investigate any clues. So some of the clues that birds leave are these little, they look like mini crop circles, but they're depressions in dirt, because a lot of birds will take dust baths, most notably in our area, the house sparrows, but chickens also do it, road runners do it, some thrashers do it. And here's what it looks like for the house sparrows. And yeah, these are common birds, but it's really fun to see these birds doing it, and they'll fight over the best spot at the spa. You'll see here. So that's a big part of it, is just like I mentioned, it's not just finding more birds, it's finding your common birds doing crazy things, and there's so much to see. So this look for bird spas is one of the tips. Another one is to look for fallen feathers, which is a sign that there's a raptor in the area. This is obvious, an obvious clue that some raptor had torn apart a bird. This is another instance on a lawn. I saw a big white splotch, walked up to it, and it was just full of feathers. If you see the feathers flying, which has happened to me before, probably has happened to some of you, look around, and you might see the plucking in action. It's a little sad, but it's very interesting. You're in the nature documentary. I have a photo in the book of something like that happening. Another clue is to look for fallen feathers, and not only smell their scent, fallen flowers, not feathers, fallen flowers. And a lot of times these flowers will have slits in them. And that's a sign that a bird has, I think insects do this too, but a lot of birds will pierce the base of the flower and extract or rob the nectar. This is a Baltimore oriole. This is, orioles do this. This is a very common behavior. Some hummingbirds also do this. And I got pictures. I was in Costa Rica recently, and looking through my photos, yes, I had photos of hummingbirds drinking nectar from the front of the flowers, but when I looked closely at the photos, they were also piercing the base of the flowers, which was pretty cool. So here's the evidence of the nectar robbing by Baltimore orioles. I also saw this with red buckeye flowers in Central Park. Another section of the book is to look for birds, find more birds while you're doing something else, because we're all busy. We don't always have time to go on birding trips or go to our local patch or whatever. So a lot of times, like when you're doing yoga outside, birds will approach, because when you're sitting down, they feel more comfortable. I have a friend that lives in San Diego. She always sends photos of pelicans flying over during her yoga sessions out there in a park. And there is a lady that was doing the downward dog pose here in my local park and was being attacked by a mockingbird while she was doing this yoga posture. I mentioned that in the book, and it was because a mockingbird had a nest close by, and it was defending its young that looks like this. This is a young fledgling. So if you are doing yoga, yeah, be careful of getting too close to birds' nests. And if you do start getting some aggressive vibes, you just move about 20 feet away and you'll be fine. Taking a ferry ride, if you're whale watching or you're on a cruise or you're just out on the water or out at the beach, definitely, especially during the winter, look for interesting ducks that are here down from the Arctic during the winter, like the long-tailed duck. So the last thing we're going to talk about are the top tech tools. So these are also ways to find birds, but using your phone or using websites and things like that. So some of you had mentioned in the chat, a great way to learn bird sounds is the Merlin Bird ID app, which of course, and this is tip number 45 in the book, let Merlin listen. This is a free app from Cornell Lab of Ornithology. If you don't have it, I can't see you anyway, but I say download it now. Even if we were live, I would say it's okay to get on your phone, download this app right now. It is a huge resource. It will give you suggestions for what you're hearing, so you let it listen. It also has a question and answer ID and a photo ID. And also don't miss on the bottom tabs, there's an explore tab that you can hit, and that will be a field guide catered to your area of all the birds that you can find and target birds, all sorts of things. Now, this is number 47. I mentioned before, birdcast.info. This is tonight's forecast, which is not as hot as what I showed you for tomorrow night's, but same idea. You visit birdcast.info. This is not the only tool you will find there. You can also watch live migration maps of the radar throughout the night if you want to stay up all night. There's also a migration dashboard that has statistics from how migration went the night before. It's amazing. So definitely check out birdcast.info. It's during spring and fall migration. One of my favorite parts of the ebird.org website is Explore. You do have to have an account to use a lot of these features, but it's going to be worth it to have an account because we offer so many free resources and tools and all of these things. So I don't want that to scare you away from these types of resources because, for example, if you look in the upper right where the green boxes, I enter Ashland, Massachusetts, and it shows you all the hotspots. It's a little hard to see, so I put the terrain map here or the satellite view. And all of those little points are all of the hotspots in the area. So you can click on one and it will give you details of all the birds that were spotted in that hotspot, the most recent sightings. You can look at bar charts for certain birds that are seen throughout the year. This is great for trip planning. If you're going to go on a trip and you want to know what birds are in the area, look for the hotspots there, click on some hotspots and look at those pages for the hotspots, and you'll have some target birds and things to look for. It works for any place. This is California. I used this a lot when I was looking for the Acorn Woodpecker, as I mentioned. So eBird, Explorer, there are other things. These are the hotspot explorer maps. There's also species maps. If you want to see a specific species, you could type it in the species map and it'll show you where to find it. And this is global. This is anywhere in the world you can look for locations and hotspots. I do want to mention too, like for technology, binoculars. There's a common misconception that binoculars are pretty expensive. Some of them are. You could spend a lot of money on binoculars, but in my book, I do mention that there is a pair of binoculars put out by Bushnell. They're Bushnell Falcons, and they're 7 by 35 millimeter. That's magnification by objective lens size, and $35 or less. And they're kind of not the sleek design, it's a different design. So they're kind of bulky, but many of my students use them. And I have had some students tell me that people say, you need some new binoculars, but they don't. Trust me, these binoculars, if you want to get started or you have a friend or someone that isn't sure they want to invest a lot, the Bushnell Falcons 7 by 35, they are definitely affordable. And also sharing with the community. I mentioned, community is a big part of birding. I lead a lot of bird walks. I encourage you to, if you're seeing birds, share it with your friends, tell them what you're seeing, take them on a walk to the local hatch and check out all the native plants and look for movement and listen for birds. I did say I was going to just read a blurb. This is a review from Joan Strassman, who is the author of Slow Birding. And I love this review she did of my book, and it kind of sums it up. Find More Birds is a book I will turn to often for its great tips on finding birds, not in remote forests, but right at home, at a melting drip from a snowbank, or where mowed grass meets the forest. Look at quivering bit of bark. Find the local dump or a children's playground. Don't forget to look up. Stay still and stay patient. Help others and ask for help yourself. It could be a guide for life, not just for seeing the birds that are all around us. So, of course, I was very excited to get that review, but it is. I mean, like I mentioned, do yoga. Yoga does help you find more birds. And I also think yoga is great. It's changed my life. I didn't start doing it until a few years ago, but anyway, I love that review. And we're going to move on to questions and answers. And I do want to mention, I'm on all the social media channels. You can find all the links at brooklynbridgebirds.com, which is my Tumblr blog, but that will connect you to everything and even my email and everything. So definitely keep in touch. And I'm going to stop the slideshow and I will turn it over to Mina for Q&A.
Wow. I've been watching the chat and I'm just thinking, everything you just said has brought back so many memories, good memories for so many people in our audience. So thank you for that. It seems like we've really, spent a lot of time with birds and have learned a lot tonight. So we're going to get to some questions. We're probably not going to get to all of them, but feel free to put them in the Q&A. I'll keep track of them. And I have talked to Heather about the possibility of a second session. So if you don't get your question answered today, stay tuned. We'll try to do another one maybe in January. All right. So just to start, Linda asks, how is the hurricane going to impact migration tomorrow, do you think?
How is the what?
The hurricane. We're expecting Hurricane Lee to come up around New England.
Oh, okay, right. Yes, I have seen so if it's coming up around New England, it could very well, I think it might stall migration maybe, because if the birds are moving south and that's coming in, like for example, well, the blackpoll warblers, they migrate late. So I don't think they've reached the Northeast and are leaving yet. So I think we're good with them. But other birds that may be making the journey, we're probably going to stall. So that means the intensity, the density of birds you'll find might be more. It also, birds could be pushed back that have already started migrating. They might be pushed back and stalled. So there's always a chance of a rarity too from things coming in from the Atlantic, like more pelagic birds that you usually find out at sea.
Mm-hmm.
Great question.
I was wondering about birds in terrible, terrible weather. So like hurricanes, tornadoes, things like that. Do they just take shelter? Because you don't see like often like a lot of dead birds after a weather event.
Yeah, they do. There's a term called fallout, and it's birders will go to where a fallout is. So if there's a storm coming through, if the birds hit the storm, they'll literally fall out of the sky. They usually won't be dead. Hopefully, they'll just drop because they can't move on. And so that means the concentration of birds is just out of this world. I've only seen one fallout in my life in Florida, but that's what happens. So if it's during migration, they might be feeding and eating. If it's raining, yeah, they might be hiding. But a fallout can happen, and then if it's not raining, they'll still be foraging, and it's a huge event for finding more birds.
Sounds like it. Good and bad, right?
Yeah.
Karen asks, can a crow kill a hawk?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't know if it could. I'm not sure, but I don't think so. But I think it could probably injure a hawk. Maybe possibly a falcon, but falcons are very fast. I need to find the answer to that. But it just reminds me of another one, which is the totally opposite end of the spectrum, is that praying mantises can kill birds. I don't know if you knew that. Like small birds, hummingbirds, and even larger birds.
Okay.
So great question.
But to go back to the crow and the hawk, if the crow doesn't kill the hawk, will the hawk like go after the crow, like be like, hey, don't bug me, and maybe kill
That's what I was mentioning. At least in my experience, it seems the other way around. That the hawk is around trying to hunt, and the crows, even if they aren't residents of the area, if they're there, they just are bothered by the hawk being there, and they just chase the hawk out. So it's usually like the crows are running the show, believe it or not, even though the hawk is so much bigger, at least in my experience from what I've seen. Yes.
Okay. Madeline asks, with the acorn woodpecker burrowing its acorn granary in a house, is it likely to starve if the homeowner removes the granary?
Oh, that's a great question. Gosh, it definitely affected its food source, right? Because it was counting on that food source for the winter. I do think it probably was much more food than it needed to get through the winter. So I have a feeling it probably found another source, but yeah, that's a great question. It probably definitely made the birds stressed out, and they had to find another food source. Yes.
Mandy asks, did at some point you say MacaulayLibrary.org?
Yes, MacaulayLibrary.org is part of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. That's our digital collection. And you could go there and search for all sorts of media, audio, video, photos. And one of the tips in the book is to go there and look at photos of birds. And especially all the photos aren't great, but bad photos are actually better because you see birds in their habitat. So what I suggest is looking at photos from a hot spot, and you can see what to expect. Oh, the bird's going to be hidden. It's going to be in this marsh. It gives you a more realistic perspective. Plus, there's amazing photos, many amazing photos in Macaulay Library as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, does the Cornell lab, does it have a database? Because I feel like I used to work at the Lexington Library, and they had a database where you could look up birds, and it would actually give you the bird songs so you could identify them. Is that the same
Oh,
one?
yes. Yeah. Well, we have all of that. There's many sites at the lab that do that. All About Birds is one, ebird.org. So if you go to ebird.org, explore, like I mentioned, and you type in, it'll say type in a bird name or type in a location. Type in a bird name, it will have a listen button to listen to all its songs, and it'll have information and maps about the bird. And yeah, as you can imagine, all of these things, even if you click on a hotspot, then you'll see the list of birds for the hotspot. Then you can click on the bird there. That will take you to the sound. So you can, the potential for discovery of all this information is insane. It's great. Yes.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I do want to remind people that I'm looking at the questions in the Q&A. So if you could put your questions in the Q&A, I'm less likely to lose track of them. Nancy says, should she keep her bird bath shallow?
Yes, I do think so. I mean, if you're noticing that a lot of birds aren't using it, I mean, if it's working for you right now, then no. But if you're noticing birds are not visiting it, yeah, try an inch or inch and a half and see, because as you can, I was shocked that a lot of times I'll watch a bird bathing after a water lab playground sprinkler, and then within like 10 minutes it's evaporated. The bird's like drinking and bathing, and then it's evaporated. So yeah.
But they prefer shallow water rather than deeper water.
Yeah, because they can't really bathe comfortably in very deep water usually. I mean, ducks can't. Ducks actually bathe when they're in the water, but songbirds usually need very shallow water.
Talk about bird bath. Larry says his wife puts fruit pieces out for the bird bath but they only ever see ants. Does that mean that birds don't eat fruit?
They do eat fruit, but I'm wondering if maybe if you put it somewhere else, not near the water, because I would put it separate from the water, but they do eat fruit. I mean, one of my favorite photos is a scarlet tanager eating a discarded apple on a lawn here. But you see that a lot in South America. Like a lot of restaurants have their feeders or like bananas or a bunch of fruits where the birds are eating.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, oranges, I think it could work. Maybe move them away from the bath.
Okay. Somebody asked, how do I get the crows to stop eating the baby barn swallows and ripping apart their nests?
Oh no, I don't know. Very good question. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess you need something to keep the crows away. I really don't have a solution for that. You just got to let nature play it out, really, with that. Unfortunately.
So Security, I think I said that name right. I hope I did. Asks, how are the birds able to fly for 3 days straight? Do they coast along the air currents for the most part?
That's a great question. So they do use some of the currents, but they are doing powered flight, like they are flapping, and that is why they double their weight. So like those blackpoll warblers, and a lot of these migrating warblers, they go into a state of what's called hyperphagia, where they just nonstop eat, which is why it's so easy to see all this movement. Like I said, they're constantly foraging, and their bones are hollow, so they don't, they're very light. So believe it or not, they do have the capacity and the energy to make that powered flight. The ones that say stop off in the Caribbean, like I said, maybe they've depleted their food sources and they need to refuel. but yeah, I mean, they likely do leverage the wind coming off the Atlantic to push them down and in as well. Great question.
So do they double their weight or something like that, you said, before they take off on these migrations because that's what they know to do?
Yeah, I mean, they have this like fat layer, which you could see like when you spread the feathers, there's fat, and it's just they're fueling up for the migration. Yeah.
It's like a runner before, like the Boston Marathon, and they're doing the carbs or whatever.
Great analogy. I love it. Yes, exactly.
So aside from that 3-day migration, how far do some birds migrate per day?
Per day. I mean, it varies. I mean, there are certain birds that migrate thousands of miles. There's Arctic terns have one of the longest. They go from the Arctic to the Antarctic.
Oh, you know what? You froze right there.
So they're, I mean, I don't know. It varies. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Let me, I turned off my video for a second. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just turned off the video just to make sure that you can hear me. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it varies based on birds, really, like different birds. Some birds are long distance migrants. Birds from here will go down to South America. I mentioned the chimney swifts will even go to Peru. But then you have short distance migrants, like the gray catbirds are only going to go to the Southeast or the Caribbean, things like that. So it definitely varies based on species.
Okay. Ludi asks, when is the main migrating time in northern Colorado? Do you happen to know?
It's about the same like in the United States. So in the spring, things peak around May. And it's a shorter migration experience in spring because the birds are in a hurry to get to their breeding locations. So spring migration does start like in March, and it does go through maybe say June, but the peak is in May. Okay. So, and then with fall, birds start moving south late July, and it peaks September, October, which is a longer length of time to enjoy birds because they are not in a hurry. And it goes through November, even December. Is my audio coming through okay?
It's completely fine. Do you want to try coming back video wise too?
Sure.
Let's see if we lose you again. Okay, so Kathy asked the same question that I asked, or I want to know, is what particular camera and lens do you use for your photography?
So I have a DSLR. I have a Canon EOS 7D and a 100 to 400 millimeter lens. These days, the mirrorless cameras are all the rage. I have thought about switching, but I have not yet. But so that is what I use. But if you're looking to get a semi-pro setup, something similar to what I have, I would recommend the mirrorless. I think Canon R5 is one a lot of people are getting.
Are they waterproof? So like if you have to be out for what,
No, so I always bring you can buy like official like covers for them, but any kind of a plastic bag and a rubber band will work. Yeah. Especially these days. I mean, it rains. There's no rain in the forecast, and then it rains. So I always have something with me. Yeah.
Do you also have any kind of lighting, or do you just like go natural?
I use no flash, no lighting, and this is an important aspect of how I do it. I don't use any bird call audio. It's tempting, especially these days. We have, Merlin has a lot of audio that you can play and listen to, but a lot of times it can distract the birds, especially on their breeding grounds. So I don't attract birds. I got pretty good photos, but I might be able to get even better photos if I did that. But it's more important to me that the birds are safe and comfortable. So I don't use any bait, any flash or sound.
Okay, that's good to know, because I do think sometimes we get too much in our heads and don't think about the bigger picture. What was the name of that binocular again?
So that's a Bushnell Falcon 7 by 35 millimeter. And the most important thing with binoculars are the specs. So you don't want to get something that's going to be too heavy or like with a small field of view. So I mentioned this in the book, but 7 by 35, 8 by 42, 10 by 42. Those are like the most ideal ones for, there's also compact options like 8 by 25, things like that. But your general ones are the 3 I just mentioned.
Okay. Tyler says, how should I best look for pelagic and rare birds after a hurricane, especially on Cape Cod?
Wow, I've never been to Cape Cod, but I actually saw some kind of was it Leach's storm petrel when I was in St. Augustine, just right on the beach. So I would go out to the coast, just look for interesting flight, because the storm petrels especially have that kind of dippy flight that's really stands out as something different. A scope, which I don't mention in the book, but a spotting scope is great for setting up on the coast and looking out on the horizon for these pelagic birds that might be not right on the shoreline, but you're close enough that you can get them with a scope. If you're good at taking photographs through a scope, definitely photograph them so you can help ID them. That will help you ID them. But yeah, great question.
Excellent. This is the last question from the audience. Teresa asks, when will my hummingbirds leave to go south and how far will they go?
Was it when or when will they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When will they-
So they're mostly ruby-throated hummingbirds are in our area. A lot of them have already taken off. I know my dad lives down in South Carolina, and he said, "Oh, my hummingbirds are gone. Where did they go?" So, they're passing through. They could still pass through for the next month or so. But yeah, you'll notice them diminishing, and they're gonna go fly mostly down to Mexico. They cross the Gulf of Mexico in one fell swoop. They fly like 24 hours nonstop. So that's an amazing migration flight that they make.
They're small but mighty.
Yes.
So my last question to you, Heather, is now this book just came out a month ago. What are you working on for next?
Great question. Well, I do have a translation that I worked on with my Spanish teacher, Enrique Yepes, of the first book, which is Birding at the Bridge. So hopefully we'll get that out. If you're interested in that, do send me an email or get in touch with me, because we need some interest in that in order to make that happen in an ebook. But other than that, I'm leading bird walks. I'm always doing these kinds of talks, and I work at Cardinal Lab of Ornithology full time as a application developer for eBird and Birdcast and things like that. But I'm always thinking of different things. I do have some ideas for a next book, but just throwing of them around in my head, nothing solid yet.
Well, we'll look forward to whatever you do, and as I said, I will hopefully have another date with you, because this has been so fabulous and so enlightening. And again, it's brought so much happiness, I think, as we start thinking about all of the birds that we've seen in our lifetime. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, thank you too. It's been so much fun. I loved it.
I'm so glad. Well, thank you everybody for being here, and happy bird watching. No, birding. Somebody said that bird watching is too narrow for what we want to do. So happy.
Well, and I'm calling it bird finding now, because I came up with bird finding because of Find More Birds. You can call it whatever you want. It's all the same. Yeah, but happy migration.
That's right. And look out for the birds tomorrow. It's gonna be a lot of them. Anyways, thank you, Heather. Good night, and everybody have a wonderful evening.
Good night. Bye.